These were not the first. Thousands came before to put in their bid for democracy. Many of them died doing their duty to ensure that Britain could remain free. On the Windrush, they thought they were British citizens until they felt the iron fists in the velvet mittens. No longer required citizens soon became immigrants, which Mosley and Powell used to fuel ignorance. They came upon the Windrush in 48, the flame of hope in their hearts, whatever fate. A few who formed the vanguard came through, although the doors barred. It's true that most found it hard, but survivors always find a way. They came a part of the great diaspora to claim our right to be part of what we all are. This land, so fit for heroes, must hand the laurels to those whose stand, as history shows, built multicultural Britain today. The living was hard all through the 50s.
Welcome and greetings from the Windrush Caribbean Festival to all of those who have joined us on the internet. You're going to only have a still image of me today due to technical problems. Thank you to our sponsors and partners who made tonight possible. We also acknowledge our community partners. You can find a full list on our website. Thank you to our lead sponsor, Caribbean Tales Worldwide Distributions and Caribbean Tales TV. Thank you for your support over the years. My name is Greta Mendez, and I am your host for this evening. Before we launch into the trailer, I would like to give you a brief overview of the world which helped Dr. Eric Williams, which formed actually Dr. Williams. He was born in 1911, which meant he grew up in the shadows of World War I. From the 1930s onwards, there was a massive movement towards independence from colonization by India, Africa, Caribbean, etc. After World War II, the rise of Pan-Africanism, communism, Marxism, socialism, etc., and writers and activists such as C.L.R. James, Patrice Lumumba, Chedi Jagan, Uriah Bus Butlers, and endless struggles with the USA. All of these and much more fed into Williams. The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago got its independence on the 31st of August, 1962. Today we celebrate 58 years of independence, Dr. Eric Williams was our first Prime Minister and the subject of Mariel Brown film Inward Hunger, which is the title of Williams' autobiography. I look forward to our panel discussion. First, we will view Inward Hunger trailer.
I, Eric Eustace Williams,
I, Eric Eustace Williams,
do swear
do swear
that I will be faithful
that I will be faithful.
and bear true.
The independent nation of which we dream is like to a grain of mustard seed, which indeed is the least of all seeds. But when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs.
I am delighted to introduce our esteemed panelists, Malika Booker and director Mariel Brown. Malika Booker is a British poet and theatre maker of Guyanese and Caribbean and Grenadian, heritage, and the founder. What?
I am. Greta, keep going.
And the founder of the writer collective, Malika Book Poetry Kitchen. Her pamphlet, Breadfruit, received a Poetry Society recommendation, and her poetry collection, Pepper Sand Seed, was shortlisted for the OCM Booker's Prize and the Seamus Heaney Center Prize 2014 prize for first full collection. She is published with the poets Sharon Olds and Warsaw Shire in the Penguin Modern Poets series, Your Family, Your Body. And her poem Nine Nights was first published in the Poetry Review in autumn 2016, was shortlisted for Best Single Poem in 2017. Forward Prize. This year, her poem, The Little Miracles, commissioned by and published by Magnum 75, has been shortlisted for the Best Poem in 2020 Forward Prize. Mariel Brown. Mariel Brown is an award-winning filmmaker and director of the creative and production company Savant and Savant, and co-founder of filmmaker organization Filmco. Mariel has been working in film and television since 1997. She's committed to uncovering and documenting the Caribbean's rich history and culture, and is especially interested in exploring the lives of its often unheralded artists and writers. Mariel's most recent film is the feature-length documentary, Unfinished Sentences, a personal exploration of her tumultuous relationship with her late father, writer Wayne Brown. Mariel is a four-time Trinidad and Tobago Film Festival Award winner, and both her film and television work has won awards locally and internationally. Discussion. A lot. Mariel.
Yeah.
Do you think Hello.
Say
Sorry,
hi to
sorry,
everyone who's
I
tuning in
can't
to
see you all. I
watch.
feel I'm in a disconnected world. Anyway, as a Trinidadian, some of the aspirations that Dr. Eric Williams had for our society, our culture. Some of them, which was free education for all, religious freedom, hence the reason we have both Eid and Diwali as public holidays, culture and its importance in welding our society together, hence the reason he initiated Better Village. He also reclaimed Shagaramas, which was held by the US, which was leased by Britain. Do you think he has, and that's only to list a few, do you think he has achieved his vision? And what was your inspiration for doing the film, Inward Hunger?
Well, I think thanks, Greta, for your introduction, and thank you so much to Caribbean Tales and the Windrush Caribbean Film Festival for inviting me to speak today, and also for showing episode 1 of Inward Hunger. I produced Inward Hunger in the first place. So what I'll do, Greta, is I'll respond to your second question first, I think. That's a good place to start. I produced Inward Hunger in 2010, 2011 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Eric Williams's birth. One of the things that fascinates me in general is people's personal stories. And as a documentary filmmaker from Trinidad and Tobago, perhaps one of the most enigmatic figures that I had ever come across was Eric Williams, which seems an odd thing to say for someone who seemed to live in the public eye so much. I mean, when I was at primary school, Eric Williams' portrait was on the wall of every classroom across Trinidad and Tobago. I knew him as the Prime Minister. And I was also, but when I became an adult and I started to think to myself, well, who is this Eric Williams? I realized I knew actually very little about him. I knew more about John F. Kennedy than I knew about my own Prime Minister. And I think that's one of the tragedies of our own Caribbean story, that we know more about the stories of other places than we know about our own stories. And so with Inward Hunger, I sort of was chatting to my father at maybe in 2010 or 2009, just chatting to him about this. When I say 2010, that's completely wrong. He died in 2009. So sorry, it would have been years prior to that. Yeah, sorry, that's a really strange mistake to make. Anyway, so I was talking to Daddy, and I was telling him about this series that I would love to do, and I wanted to do a series of biographies of all sorts of people around the Caribbean. And I was chatting to him about Eric Williams, and I said, what do you think of Eric Williams? And he said, well, what do you think of Eric Williams? And I didn't really know because I didn't know anything about it. And he said that he felt that Williams was a tragic figure, and that maybe that was the lens through which I should make the film, make the documentary. Of course, fast forward several years, I realized it was going to be the 100th anniversary of his birth, and I sort of went for it because I thought, well, maybe this would be an opportunity to actually raise some money through sponsorship to make the series. And I was really lucky because I got corporate sponsorship in Trinidad through First Citizens Bank and a couple other organizations in Trinidad. And I really started to kind of dig deep. I had a very wonderful little team working with me on research and writing. And over the course of about 6 or 7 months, I was able to convince William's daughter, Erica Williams Connell, to be interviewed. She's very, very cautious and very protective of her father's legacy. And so understandably, I think she was nervous. I actually flew to Florida to do the interview with her, and I think to this day, it's one of my proudest interviews ever. And I think that, I feel as though iconoclasts all have personal stories, and Williams was an iconoclast. And I hope that people agree and see that during the course of not only the first episode of Inward Hunger, but the entire series, we're really able to reveal the man that Eric Williams was, the good and the bad, the positive and the negative, the hopeful and the despairing. Yeah, I don't know if that sort of answers your question.
Yeah, well, I was actually very pleased that you did this film, because what it did for me, the word inward hunger, and the subtext of that, he goes, the education of a prime minister. So obviously he was constantly learning, constantly analyzing. And this book is very good because it gives you more of an insight into Eric Williams. And as you rightly said, we know more about the outside than we know about the inside of our cultures. And he himself, he told us as a society, we must decolonize our minds. We must write our own history and be authors of our own destiny. And that is so applicable now, even to Black Lives Movement. We need to put that thrust even more, okay? Shifting to Malika, who is a wordsmith, a poet who can distill the wonderfulness about poetry. People who write poetry, I'm in awe of them, because how they can distill the word and a sentence and a phrase to resonate so much with our psychic space. Eric Williams was a great orator. He had a way of communicating on all levels. And like, for instance, he says, we must decolonize our minds because Massa Day done. What a fantastic thing to bring you in there, Malika.
So I really kind of struck by the way he his writing, the way he wrote, and also the way he spoke. He spoke in a very lyrical, poetic way. He really emphasized the syllables, the vowel sounds in terms of writing. So even when we watch the film later on, we'll see when he talks about the pressures of public life and retreating to the study, which could have been said in those two sentences. How he takes his time with the paragraph and what happens with that paragraph. He actually, listening to his pauses and the breaths, it's almost Shakespearean the way he speaks, with the pressures from individual citizens and sectional, and he really pronounces interest. Unfortunately, when he reaches ashram, study, grievances, private citizens, and it's that enunciation that enabled, I think, him to communicate so well. And for as people said, it felt like he was speaking to the ordinary person. Also, what I really found interesting, or I find interesting about his writing, but also his speeches, is that it seems quite simple. It seems quite conversational. It draws a lot on, it's deliberately kind of paced and pathos. But the thing that I like is that he always shows in an illusion. So there's a bit where he's speaking about his father sneering at the prize giving when he became third in elementary school. And it's the way he tells the stories or the little anecdotes that he tells in his descriptions. And there's the bit where he comes to and he says, I had been given, for the prize that I'd been given having come third. And there's a little pause, great expectations. I should have come first. And then he pauses and he says, poor man, little did he suspect. A great story. So between the orating, between the writing, there's this little stories. You get this little element of his feelings for his father. But then this repetition of great expectations. It's an illusion that is so much wider. Because it's alluding to the book, the literature, it's alluding to Pip, it's alluding to the thing of self-improvement and development. And it's something that he does continuously. I was looking at a speech that he did when Paisley Crawford got the Olympic gold. And he just is saying, Trinidad and Tobago's population, we've come out tonight to salute him. And then he seems to go off on a tangent and says, I saw this astronaut yesterday. American last week, this American astronaut. He was touring the country. We don't have an astronaut to tour the country, but we can have a man who the astronaut can't catch. But and that's where he does this beautiful thing, because when he brings in the astronaut, he's saying, this is our first gold medal. This is our astronaut. This is our person who landed on Mars. This is the person putting Trinidad on the map. And it's those little, I'm fascinated as a writer with those little allusions that he kind of places into the speech that has that seems quite colloquial and quite conversational, and how he gets those allusions in that do so much work for him.
Okay. Are there any questions from the viewers? No? Okay. I will actually, relating to Mariel, as somebody who listened very much, I agree with you about the cadence of his voice and the way he communicates a lot. Now, Mariel, yesterday we were talking about capitalism and slavery, which was a big work written by Dr. Williams in 1944. It was published in 1944. Now we're doing the Black Lives Matter in Britain. We are speaking very much and making the links between capitalism and slavery. But Dr. Williams wrote that book in 1944. It was not published in England because the English did not like the book until 1964. Can you bring some insight onto that, Mariel?
Onto what exactly? The book?
About capitalism and slavery and its importance and its significance.
Well, just to say that the basis for capitalism and slavery formed his master's thesis when he was at Oxford. And so he actually began that work much earlier than 1944.
It was published.
Essentially, the basic, the thinking behind capitalism and slavery is to question, in a sense, assail the long-held belief that the British, the abolition of slavery was an altruistic thing, and to actually question that and to pose the idea that actually perhaps the abolition of slavery had more to do with economics than kindness and thoughtfulness and a belief in human rights. And really, it was a revolutionary book at the time. What's really interesting about Williams, though, is he wasn't a revolutionary. Politically, he did not, his daughter describes him as a centrist. And of course, I don't know for all our people who are looking on right now whether they're aware of this catastrophic breakup between sort of Williams and CLR James. And James, who had been sort of like a mentor to Williams when he was younger. And sorry, that's my dog barking, apologies. And part of it had to do with the fact that Williams sort of towed the line a little bit. And I think that fundamentally there was a belief that British institutions were actually better. What's curious about Williams is that even having written Capitalism and Slavery, when it came time to drafting the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, came time to designing the education system that would follow independence, basically both are heavily based on the British system of governance and the British education system. And so, several archaic laws were retained in the Constitution. There wasn't any revolutionary way of thinking about people's rights and the way they could exercise them. So he was I would say that Williams was a really, really complex figure. And one of the joys of being a documentary maker, if you're a curious person, is starting to kind of peel back the layers of the onion to reveal this complexity. So it's interesting to me that somebody who could have written such a revolutionary book and thesis was also not fundamentally a revolutionary, even though he knew and was familiar with and often friendly with people who had really controversial political views and who lived their lives according to those political views.
I would agree with you when you said, because I think if you read the early stages of Dr. Eric Williams, he really wanted to be an academic, yeah, and to do a lot of analytical thinking. He wanted to write, he wanted to look at his culture, and gradually, as I said, he got swept into this ocean of politics that was happening there. Because remember, he was having these massive fights with the Caribbean Commission. Yeah, and he was always fighting with Washington, and the fights with Washington to get back Chaguaramas. And I will think, part of me is thinking that, because if you read the book, you could see his vision was really to eradicate all that you have said. But the thing about it is that we were so webbed. All the countries that got independence were so enmeshed with the British structure, we were so enmeshed, is how do you begin to extract and pull that apart to achieve what you want, yeah? And so therefore, if you read the book, there are lots of references where you see him struggling with that, okay?
Greta, would you mind if I said something there?
Oh, no, you go right ahead.
I think people forget that actually where the politicians of the Caribbean spent their time and their creativity and their thinking was on the construction of federation. After federation collapsed, it took very little time for Jamaica and Trinidad to move towards independence. So I think Williams had imagined an entirely different future for Trinidad than what actually came to be. And I feel as though that the collapse of federation after Jamaica withdrew from the federal unit was a devastating heartbreak for Williams. And I'm not sure that he ever actually recovered from that. And I think that sort of prefaced so much of what would happen over the next few years in Trinidad and Tobago and for the rest of his time as Prime Minister. You know, that I mean, it must have been a devastating blow to have believed something so grand and so visionary for a region that disintegrated before your very eyes. I mean, we have CARICOM and we have other institutions, but they in no way match the largeness of the idea and the thinking of federation, you know?
I will totally agree with you, because I think that shattered him, because the federation, they wanted a total Caribbean. I mean, he was a very Caribbean man, I feel, and he wanted that Caribbean. We would have been one society, all interlocking, what you would call that thing. And so therefore, that's why he said, 1 out of 10 equals north. Malika, he said 1 out of 10 equals north. And so I totally agree with you. I think it shattered because his vision was for the Caribbean. Okay. Malika, I was born here and here I stay with the people of Trinidad and Tobago who educated me free of charge for 9 years at Queen's Royal College and for 5 years at Oxford, who have made me, and this interesting, Mariel, whatever I am, and who have been or might be at any time the victim of the very pressures which I have been fighting against for 12 years. I am going to let down my bucket where I am, right here with you in the British West Indies. You want to speak to that, Malika?
For me, I think it's yet again you're seeing that there's this conversation happening. I am this, and also the use of repetition. You know, I'm a poet. I'm not a politician. I'm not a historian. So I'm just totally bewitched by language. But there you're seeing repetition. I am this. I am that. I am who you bought. Blah blah. And he does the same thing again. He swept you in. You're listening. And then there comes the illusion, the bucket, the same as when when you'll hear in the film when he's speaking and he's talking about going retiring to study and trying to find the peace in there, and then he says the price of air and sunlight. There are these beautiful little moments that he brings in that actually illuminate what came before, kind of like a poem. It just kind of illuminates and it kind of creates this kind of blossoming flower in between, and you can and it creates a picture in your mind that does so much more for the speech in a way. And it's very interesting to me, not only in the speech, but in terms of writing, because last year I did a project where I was responding poetically to a lot of the speeches from British politicians around Brexit, and most of the speeches were so literal, so much jargon, that it was very hard. And I realized in a way that the reason why there wasn't those speeches didn't have impact is they were not those illuminating moments. They were not those sparks in there for the imagination that great orators have. And I wouldn't say that Eric was a great orator, but I think that he was able to speak in a way that everybody who was in an audience felt that he was speaking to them. And felt that he could respond to them, and also, he was utilizing in his speech patterns, in his talk, in what he was saying, his education. But ever so often, he would in the speech he would be saying to people, "I am Trinidadian. Here is this little thing that shows I'm rooted here. I understand the colloquialism from here as well." Are
there any questions from the audience? They're silent. I'm not seeing any popping up. Okay. Oops. Here we go. Okay. Nope. Okay. I will just read again, because I thank you so much for bringing inward hunger to my eyes again. His word on democracy, because he was very strong on saying democracy is more than voting. Democracy, it's about citizenship. It's about how much you contribute to your society. And that's why he had what you had. He had village councils, he had better councils, because I also think, to some degree, that we as a people also failed Williams, because we did not pick up the mantle, because in a way he didn't really want to be the leader alone. He wanted visionaries, he wanted people to contribute, he wanted our education to be very political, so that we would not be led by emotion, but by the substance of what people were saying. What do you think, Mariel?
I don't agree with what you're saying. I think that by the time Williams had died, he had been Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago for just about 20 years. That's too long. I think we can all agree that kind of term in office is not good for anybody, that length of time in office. And I feel as though, unfortunately, Trinidad is undoubtedly a very difficult place to govern. We are a truly plural society. I think it probably suffers with many of the same challenges that Guyana suffers with. And so you're bringing together very different cultural forces and trying to govern. And I think that must be really, really hard. When you understand that Trinidadians who have beautiful houses and beautiful cars will still go and storm Panorama and then argue that it was their right to storm Panorama, you kind of get a sense. We can laugh at that, but that's part of the Trinidadian psyche, and I feel that maybe this is something we inherited from the French, which is we are quite anarchist in a kind of a way, which is very different to Jamaicans, who are much more, not that they're more law-abiding, but they understand the rule of law a lot more, and they're less likely to sort of challenge and disrupt than Trinidadians are. And so I feel as though, in a way, Williams, she sort of created a beast.
Yeah.
And the longer he was in power, the more entrenched that beast became. I mean, Williams did nothing to help racial division in Trinidad and Tobago between the East Indians and the Afro-Caribbeans. He probably made those issues and problems more entrenched. He paid a lip service to the idea of culture, but he was not really, to my mind, based on what I have seen, while he was, there's this wonderful place in the UWI library at UWI St. Augustine. His daughter Erica has created the Eric Williams Memorial Collection, and so there are all these documents and trinkets and things all over the place. And so while he was a real reader, there's no evidence that I have seen that he appreciated art and dance and music particularly. I think his support for culture was politically expedient, and the difference in his support can certainly be demonstrated in the profound difference between, for example, Jamaican art and culture versus Trinidadian art and culture, because Edna Manley and Norman Manley really believed in the visual arts as something that could be transformative. So, I feel as though Williams' legacy in terms of education, in terms of creation of the infrastructure that would support oil and natural gas in Trinidad, it has what has made Trinidad's economy for so long so healthy, although right now we're going through a horrific recession, which I suppose everybody is. But so he was a visionary in terms of oil and natural gas, in terms of education, most definitely, but also Trinidad suffers with top-down politics, top-down governance, a lack of, we are unable to make, a lack of autonomy within the civil service, lack of autonomy across the education system as well, I would say. So there are difficult legacies there, I would say it's a mixed bag with Williams.
Williams definitely was a mixed bag, and I go back and I come back to the thing you said, because the Federation was his baby, and that is vision and his vision for Trinidad. I will also say that he did give us the mantle that culture is important. It was for us to pick it up and run with it. You understand what I'm saying?
But proper money was never really invested in culture.
Okay.
Proper money. The kind of money that was invested in oil and gas.
Yes.
We have a national museum and art gallery. Walk around Jamaica's National Gallery. An economy which has traditionally suffered far worse than we have in Trinidad. It's embarrassing. It's actually mortifying, because you go and you walk around the National Gallery in Jamaica, and it is a phenomenal institution. Right. I work in the visual arts in Trinidad, not only as a filmmaker, but I work in the visual arts in Trinidad, and I understand the legacy of the kind of ambivalence to the visual arts that Williams.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, sorry, my head went trying to look to see if anybody was asking questions and bringing in some questions from the audience. But I just want, before we go, because I think we're about to go to the film, and I just want to read one thing he wrote about sectionalism. Our independent society inherited the sectionalism and individualism bred by colonialism. The essence of a colonial system was internal disunity, evidenced by the attempt to segregate African tribes, the separation of African freedom from Indian immigrants, the contrast between countryside and town, the confusion of racial origins among the laboring section of the population, the deliberate imposition of color distinction and gradation, the conflict between metropolitan flags in the area, the emphasis on differences between island and island. And here I kind of want to, and I think it's time for us to go in to your film. Malika, would you like to say one last word?
No, not at all. Not at all. I've said it.
Okay, as somebody who's been brought even newer, and what do you think after going through the speeches? What do you think that Williams, in terms of legacy, in terms of some of his philosophy, which of course was not realized when he was alive, that we can bring forward to today in even Black Lives Matter?
Who is that for me?
Yes.
My God, that's a huge question.
All right.
I don't know if I'm if I'm capable of answering that. I think capitalism and that the book is a tremendous book, and it's a seminal book. I think that that we're all reading up. We've all got people who are reading up and putting together book lists to kind of educate themselves. I think that would be a book to be put on that book list. I think that one of the things that I would say, I mean, I grew up in Guyana. I'm not Trinidadian, although happy independence, Trinidad. But one of the things that I would say is that there was a kind of, we can also learn that people can have policies, they can have ideologies, they can do amazing work, transformative work, but sometimes when they're in positions to kind of put some of those works in action, sometimes we don't necessarily see that happening, and sometimes they might be visionary, but they might not be the person who has that ability to enforce it. So I think in a way what we most probably need is a surrounding of all different types of people. I think at heart, I would see Eric Williams as a profoundly amazing historian. And yes, he was a great prime minister, but I think fundamentally he was a historian. And that, yeah, it's just like I'm a writer, not a politician. So if you stick me into politics or a political role, or ask me a really kind of convoluted political question on the spot, this is the answer you're going to get. But if you ask me about literature and writing and language, I'm quite down with that. So yeah.
But I think you answered it exactly and most eloquently, because visionaries sometimes cannot always realize their vision. Great at one thing, but it does not kill their vision, because, okay. So now we are going to swing, and thank you so very much, Mariel Brown and Malika Booker, for being a panelist and opening up our psychic space to the works and the man who we still don't know who he is, Dr. Eric Williams. Thank you. Thank you very much to our panelists, everyone who joined us online. I hope the discussion and the film will inspire us all to delve beneath the surface and continue in our quest for liberation, write our own stories, and be the author of your own destinies. Before we go to the film, I would like to remind you that Windrush Caribbean Film Festival has tickets and passes on sale for future events. Check out our website, www.filmfestival.com. Sorry, I am having, oh my gosh. Sorry to all the listeners. Tell all your friends to join us. We will be screening episode 1 of Inward Hunger. To watch episode 2 and 3, they can be viewed on Caribbean Tales TV, and the screening will begin very shortly.
In May 48,